6:30. I'd like to begin with a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge with respect that we are meeting on the traditional territories of the Lekwungen-speaking people, and we are honored to have the opportunity to build strong working relationships with the people of the Songhees and Esquimalt nations. I will call this inaugural meeting of the Planning and Land Use Committee meeting to order. Start seeking approval of the agenda. I would need a mover to approve the agenda. We have a mover in Kathleen. So we are approving 2.1 Planning and Land Use Committee meeting agenda for May 1st, 2023. And the recommendation is that the agenda of the Planning and Land Use Committee meeting of May 1st, 2023 be adopted as presented. All those in favor? It's unanimous. We'll now move to public participation. Members of the public have the opportunity to present concerns or ask questions of the committee. Just note that comments pertaining to the following matters that have been subject to a public hearing are prohibited at this meeting by law 1913 CD 33 2350 Sooke Road. Do we have anyone online, Amanda, or anything? No. Okay. Anyone in the audience? I don't believe so. Okay, moving on. We will move to item 4, new business. 4.1, we have a presentation from Desiree Givens from the Planning Department, City of Colwood.
Thank you. I don't have a presentation prepared, but I just wanted to briefly summarize the information that has been included in your agenda package. So this is just about the Transit Growth Area 1 zone, and this was considered by council last week, and staff introduced it as a new tool to help guide development along Sooke Road. The Transit Growth Area 1 zone is a template zone. It's a departure from past approaches that the city has taken to development, wherein we created comprehensive development zones, which are very site specific and catered to a specific development proposal. And so now the new TGA1 zone is a template zone. It's meant to be a default zone that includes certain parameters and regulations to help guide development, and the intent is to ensure that proposals that are being brought before committee and council are structured or developed in a way that suits the city's regulations and meets the intent of the OCP with respect to height, scale, and gently transitioning developments down to existing residential developments. Information has been provided to you in the staff report in the agenda package, and if you have any questions, myself or Ms. Hernandez are available. Otherwise, yeah, we look forward to introducing you to 2 rezoning applications that are in the transit growth area tonight.
Thank you, Desiree. Are there any questions from the committee for our city planning department, either Desiree or Yasmin Hernandez, our senior planner?
Hi, Desiree. Just a question for you in terms of transition, and this relates to some of the applications that are being made. How does Colwood in the planning department deal with the issue of a transition from an old zoning bylaw to a new one? Are there any particular transition provisions we should know about? Can you elaborate perhaps on your thoughts on that?
Thank you. I guess is the question, given that the OCP is now 5 years old, then you're wondering how we deal with policies that are from 2018 and or
zoned, and these are zoning applications, rezoning applications, and so it's new. Is there any way that we've done any kind of transition? Is there a transition process, or is it just you jump from R1 to Transit Growth Area 1? And how does that affect backlog, that kind of thing?
Okay, thank you. I understand the question better now. So the transition is each application will still be coming to council and committee for consideration. And so properties aren't being rezoned from R1 to TJA1 zone automatically. Each of them will be coming before committee and council for individual consideration, and it'll be determined at that time whether or not council would like to rezone it to the TJA1 zone, or perhaps in cases where council and committee feel that the TJA1 zone isn't appropriate, there's other options available as well. So does that answer your question? Okay, thank you.
Any more questions from anybody in the committee at all? No. Okay, just in follow up to that, Desiree, I just asked one question. I think for the proponents of applications that were already underway or midstream prior to the TGA change, was there discussion with those proponents or advance notification of the pending change, or is this something that that they would have been hearing about for the first time as well?
Thank you. This would have been the first time that they're hearing about it. I think the meeting last week would have been the first time that it was officially introduced, and it was public knowledge that it was staff recommendation to rezone or to have council consider rezoning applications against this TJA1 zone. So for the applications that are already in stream, we have provided feedback to the applicants back in December, speaking to whether or not we felt that the policies in the OCP were being met. But in terms of the Transit Growth Area 1 zone, there hasn't been much communication about that quite yet.
Great, thank you. There's no further question, or you have a question? Yeah.
Would you assume that the applicants on that have been made in on Sooke Road, will they be applying under the new regulation, or are they going to keep their application as previous?
Thank you for the question. So I think that's up to the applicant. Staff are recommending that they be rezoned to the TJA1 zone, just because this is a tool that was meant to ensure that developments are being sensitively integrated into existing neighborhoods. However, like I mentioned, if council or committee decides that the applications would be better fitted for a different type of zone, such as a comprehensive development zone, then that's up to council to make that decision. And that option is available, and applicants can request that if they would like.
Yeah, and I think that will segue into the next agenda item 4.2. So sorry, Yasmin, did you want to provide some context there?
Yes, so maybe just to clarify and add to the conversation that Desiree has outlined. So we have had to every applicant that has applied, whether it was an existing application or a new inquiry, we have gone through the OCP policy and the scheme and the framework that reviews against compliance with the OCP. And we have flagged for them areas where we feel that they are not meeting the intent of the OCP, and have given them an opportunity to then present or articulate to us how do they think that the proposal respectfully integrates. I think one of the challenges that we're trying to address with this transit growth area zone is that the statement is very ambitious in expecting us that we would integrate a 6-story building with an R1 zone, because it is absolutely correct. There's no good, smooth integration between 1 to 2-story single-family homes and a 6-story apartment building. What the official community plan provides is a very general statements of intent that need to be proven out with a proposal by each applicant as to how do they see it achieving. What is the setback that they are proposing? Are they stepping down? Are they adding an enhanced buffer? Like, what are the design elements that they are incorporating to justify meeting these respectful integration component? Because we haven't had those parameters outlined, we have had, as you can imagine, challenging conversations with applicants that may feel like they have done a wholesome attempt at accommodating a 6-story apartment, and yet where we may have different views on whether it is a sensitive integration or an adequate amount of units for the space allocated. And so with that in mind and with a number of objectives in mind, we went off to seek a third-party review of the transit growth area as a template zone that it would give us parameters of setbacks, stepping back, landscape buffers that would give us comfort that we're implementing the official community plan vision. So this transit growth corridor is that attempt of setting a standard for what a 6-story building would look like that adequately integrates. What would townhomes need to meet in terms of requirements to adequately integrate with single family? And so this is the transit growth, the purpose of the transit growth area exercise. And even though the applicants that have been in the stream were not consulted in the development of the transit growth area, it's because we're implementing the OCP. We are simply framing up parameters that are building on the existing policy that is the City of Colwood's expectation. And the conversations that we have had to date repeatedly with applicants have been consistent and delivering the same concerns or articulated the same discussion that is included with a report for each specific application. So the analysis is not new to the applicants. We've delivered that. We've had those conversations on an ongoing basis.
Thank you, Yasmin. I have a question from James here.
Hi, yes, I wanted to confirm that this will, with the new zone, that this committee and subsequent council meetings will be the first time that we are going to be weighing in on whether or not a development application satisfies the needs of the OCP, and will therefore be setting like the first precedent in that with this new zone.
These two applications are the first two applications on the transit growth corridor that we're bringing forward to council while the transit growth area zone was endorsed for us to use as a framework for assessment. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Yasmin. Any further questions from committee at all? No. Okay, so without further ado, then we'll move on to the item 4.2, and we'll call upon Desiree as well to provide some information on rezoning application RZ 22016 for 2324 Sooke Road, where right now the recommendation as written is that the Planning and Land Use Committee recommend to Council that the proposal for rezoning application number RZ 22016 for 2324 Sooke Road be revised so that it complies with the regulatory conditions of the proposed TJA 1 zone. Desiree.
Thank you. So the next item is 2324 Sooke Road rezoning application. For context, the property is located on Sooke Road in Linlark Place at the start of a residential cul-de-sac on Linlark Place. This slide shows kind of the evolution of the history and the evolution of the application and how we have arrived here. So in August 2022, the application was received, and between when we first received the application and now, staff have reviewed the application against all City of Colwood bylaws and policies. External agencies were given the opportunity to provide comment, and the applicant has led community engagement with the public. They have received feedback, revised their application, and are now here before you tonight seeking consideration on their application. The applicant is here tonight, and they'll be speaking more to their proposal, but they are proposing to build a 6-story residential condo building consisting of 70 apartment units. And these next few slides just kind of provide a summary of how the application meets or doesn't meet the policies in the official community plan for transit growth areas. So the first one here is built form policies in transit growth areas. The official community plan supports ground-oriented and low-rise buildings up to 4 stories, and 6 stories in limited situations, and limited situations is defined as situations when enhanced urban design mitigates the impact of the additional upper 2 stories. The floor area ratio is also permitted up to 2.5. So this application meets all the policies except for the 6 stories. Staff don't feel that the enhanced urban design features have been provided. However, this policy in the official community plan is subjective and open to interpretation, and we'd be looking to committee and council to confirm our interpretation of that. The OCP also speaks to transition in scale. So this is, so when there's an existing residential neighborhood of single family homes between 1 and 2 stories, the idea is that you'll transition in scale from 6-story down to maybe 4-story, down to 3-story, as kind of shown in this image here. Again, staff do not feel that this policy in the official community plan has been demonstrated by the proposal, as it has a stark contrast between single family 1-story, 2 stories up to 6 stories. Some of the other policies in the official community plan include public realm policies. Staff don't have any concerns with this application. The proposal is they're proposing to install sidewalk along Sooke Road and Linlark Place. This is in line with public realm policies whereby the public realm is improved through different amenities for transit users and pedestrians walking along the street. Also, there's policies in the official community plan for natural assets. So buildings in transit growth areas need to demonstrate that they are protecting natural assets on the land when they're in an environmentally sensitive area or if they're in a greenfield site. Given that this property is not in a greenfield site or is not a greenfield site or undeveloped, it's an undeveloped lot, and because it's not in an environmentally sensitive area, staff don't feel that there's applicability of this policy. However, we will note that the proposal requires the removal of all existing trees as well as some trees on neighboring properties. And as mentioned, the Transit Growth Area 1 is a tool to help assess developments that are designated in the official community plan as transit growth area. This slide just kind of summarizes how this proposal is not meeting the minimum parameters for lot area, which would require 4,000 square meters if you're proposing a 5 to 6 story building, as well as a lot width of at least 60 meters. This slide summarizes the applicant's and staff's engagement to date. So they held an open house in 2 open houses in early winter. They've installed a notice sign on the property, and right now we're here before you seeking consideration of the application. And then this after today, this slide also kind of shows the progression of the application. If committee decides to advance it further, it will go to council for final decision, and public notice and input and bylaw will follow after that. So the staff recommendation is included in your agenda package, but there are other options that you can consider. Option 2 is to recommend to council that the application be approved with no further revisions. Option 3 is to recommend that council request that staff provide additional information. And option 4 is to deny the application. The applicant is also here tonight and will be giving their presentation now and will be available for questions if you have any. Thank you.
Thank you, Desiree. The applicant is here. I'd call upon them to make their presentation. Thank you.
Oh, there we go. Not too loud. Hi, good evening, Mr. Chair and committee. It's an honor to be here before the very first Planning and Land Use Committee in the city of Colwood. So we're very grateful to be here tonight. My name is Rachel Sansom. I'm representing the Land Vision Group, who are the applicants. We also have this evening, we have Karan Nagra, Harj Sandhu, and Adam Sahoda. We're also representing Land Vision. Online, we have Andrea Scott, our architect, and also in the audience, we have Kristen Machina from Watt Consulting, our traffic consultants. I may break in various parts of the presentation to ask them to chime in on the odd slides. Just preface that this presentation was prepared and submitted prior to the transit growth area zone coming forward. We were not aware of the zone, but we're going to proceed on the premise that we're going to work with the CD zone at this time and carry on from there. So our proposal then, as noted, is a 6-story residential condominium within the transit corridor OCP area. On our location there at 2324 Sooke Road, backing onto Linlark cul-de-sac. So there's a view of the existing use. As you can see, the single family building in the back, and it's underdeveloped on this large lot with that one building. Here's a view of Linlark Road from Sooke Road. As you can see, it's an older, I think it was probably approved by the Ministry of Highways back in the day. It's got a very wide right of way, but unimproved with sidewalks or storm drainage or any other facilities at this time. So here's our proposal. This is looking at the building, our proposed building. And I will preface this again by saying we're certainly looking forward to any ideas and thoughts from the committee about the form and character of this building. And our architect is online to speak to this as well. So we're proposing 70 market condominiums, 46 one beds, 17 2-bedroom, and we've incorporated some 3-bedroom units. Because this is a 6-story building, we actually can afford to do some 3-story or 3-bedroom units. They're kind of rare in condos because they're expensive to provide and there's not a lot of uptake. But in this case, we were able to add some into that due to the size and scale of the building. And this is the side view. So this is looking at it as if I'm standing on Linlark. You can see the building does step back on the upper floor. And on the left-hand side, we have the drive aisle into the parkade, which gives it separation from our neighbors to the north. Andrea, I don't know if you're online. Can you hear me? Are you there? We could certainly, we're looking forward to working with the committee to gather your ideas about modifications we could make to this building to make it suit the intent of the official community plan. The idea, though, is to maintain the 6 stories only because it's a very efficient building form. The reason you don't see a lot of 4-story buildings is because they're really what's the right word for it? They're not efficient. In that, you still have to do a foundation and a roof, but by adding the 2 extra stories, you can actually make them more affordable. It used to be you'd see a lot of 4-story stick frame buildings. It's really not the case anymore. It's rare to see them except in sort of more boutique markets like Oak Bay, places like that. But certainly not for affordable, living out here in the Western communities. So here's a brief data sheet. I won't bore you with all these details because I believe this is in your package. But we talk about our setbacks, our building area, our proposed floor space ratio, which is sort of the floor area of the building based on the land area of the lot at 2.45. And then our unit count, 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms. We don't have any studios in this proposal. And here we are in the transit growth corridor in blue. So it just shows that we're in the right place, asking for the right things. And again, a little sort of line by line as to how we're trying to comply with the official community plan and the transit growth area. So again, it's a mid-rise 6-story building. These are going to be condominiums. They may be rental or market, depending on the market at the time of construction. But we are providing much needed employee housing for the region. As you know, we're still in a housing shortage. We're set the building back 8.5 meters from the neighbor to the north. And then you'll see on the landscape plan where I can describe this a little better, we're at 5 meters and 25 meters on the east side of the building. So there's actually a pretty good gap from the eastern facing bit with some landscaping. So we're going to provide fencing and screening to provide a little bit more separation with our neighbors as well. Supporting of walking and cycling. Of course, we're on a transit corridor. We're close to cycling facilities and of course, walking. And we're in close proximity to the Allendale and Hatley Park neighborhood centers. So green infrastructure density is the best way to preserve large swaths of green space. We're developing here as opposed to way out in the hills or up island. Even though it might require the removal of trees on site, replacement trees are going to be provided in accordance with your urban forestry bylaw with cash in lieu for offsite tree planting. The parquet will be EV charger ready. We'll be having heat pumps for heating and cooling. Step code of the day will be mandatory when we go to build. 50% of the property will be landscaped amenity space for the residents. And we'll also be including bike repair areas, bike stands, extra bike visitor spaces, and secure bike storage for the residents. So again, allowing up to 6 stories, we're step back the upper floor and our floor space ratio is 2.45. We're providing articulation through the balconies to provide color and rhythm and interest with the architecture. Again, Sooke Road, frequent transit corridor, and the OCP mapping clearly delineates the transit corridor and neighborhood uses. It's really challenging because there's a lot of neighborhoods along this corridor. Anywhere you go, you're going to run into a neighborhood behind your transit corridor uses. So again, we'd like the opportunity to work with you to see if we can do that transition between this building with the much needed housing and the adjacent neighborhood. Again, improving the public realm, will be providing sidewalks and frontage improvements on both sides of the building. There's a long frontage on Lindlark. So we'll be doing sidewalk, street trees, street lights, curb and gutter, and grass boulevard on both of those frontage. We're providing also road dedication on Sooke Road so that the road can be widened when the time comes. There's lots of walkway connections around the neighborhood. And again, designing the network to protect natural access, the green benefits of providing density along this transit corridor, reducing sprawl elsewhere and encouraging people to get out of their cars and take the bus. Here's our landscape plan. And this is a good way to kind of view the building as it sits on the site with relation to our neighbors. So Sooke Road, of course, we'll be dedicating road there. And Lindlark Place, again, lots of trees, boulevard, sidewalk. And you can see on the left-hand side is our drive aisle. And then the neighbor to the left will have that separation with the drive aisle, landscape screening, and then our building on the right. And then on the upper side of the screen, you can see our amenity area and landscaping with a rather large separation to the houses to the east. And then that sort of cut out funny piece again to the east, that also would be transit corridor. So that eventually would have a higher density use than is shown there. Our parkade layout, just showing the bike parking, how you get in and around, storage for the residents. And we're not asking for any parking variances. All our parking stalls and bike stalls are in accordance with the new parking bylaws. Our ground floor, typical 1 and 2 bedroom units. Again, that's a typical 2nd to 4th floor. And then on the 5th and 6th floor, this is where we get to have our 3-bedroom units. Again, we've got some typical 3-bedroom units that are suitable for families, as well as some that actually would have a lock off. So they could be either a 3-bedroom or a 1-bedroom, perhaps if you had a parent living with you or somebody that, you know, short-term stays with you, kind of give each other a little more privacy, or those could be developed as separate units altogether. But it's kind of a novel concept, and 3 bedrooms again are rare in multifamily buildings because they are difficult and expensive to build, but you can afford to do it when you go up in height. Here's a little map showing where we are in relation to all the transit and parks and cycling opportunities. We can get to the Galloping Goose Trail, which leads to the In and Rail Trail. We can walk to parks in the neighborhood, Colwood Creek Park, as well as Herm Williams Park. And of course, walking to Belmont Market or whatever commercial opportunities are coming up at the Allendale area. Our site servicing are going to include sewer, storm drainage, and water. One of our entire neighborhood there at Lindlark is currently serviced by septic fields. And we're proposing to take the sewer all the way down Lindlark to the first bend, which is as far as we can take it under gravity service, but that would afford those neighbors to hook up to that sewer if they wanted to. Also, our storm drainage, we're not allowed to have any increase in runoff as a result of this development. Fortunately, we're on a high infiltration area. A lot of Colwood is built on gravel, fortunately. So we shouldn't have any stormwater issues there. And of course, CRD water will be providing water for this building, and it will be sprinklered in accordance with the BC Building Code. Also, any hydro would be underground service to the building. So here's a picture of the sanitary sewer I just mentioned. So we would be able to bring the sewer down that road to afford our neighbors an opportunity to hook up. Any further sewer would have to come in and around. There's actually a little path at the very end of Lindlark. It's a no pointer. Did I see? No, it doesn't work. We don't have enough right of way there to install a sewer off the end of cul-de-sac bulb. But in the future, the sewer would be able to come in that way and perhaps afford gravity service to those, or they could have individual low pressure pumps and pump into our sewer that we would build via a low pressure system. So it is a bit of an economic benefit to the neighborhoods because again, new septic fields are quite expensive. They're about $30,000. and they have a lifespan. So, at some point, these guys are going to want sanitary sewer, and it's a way that Colwood doesn't have to pay for this section of it. Again, the road improvements, the access is from Linlark. We'll be providing road dedication along Sooke Road. And then we talked about, and if Kristen's here, if you have questions for the traffic engineer, there's actually no impact of this development on Sooke Road because it's such a high traffic road, but there could be some impacts to the residents of Linlark. So what we thought we'd like to do is separate the right and left turn lanes as you come out of Linlark. If we reflect back to an earlier slide, you can see it's quite narrow there right now. So we could provide a right and left turn lane. So as you're waiting to go left, you're not blocking somebody that wants to go right. And it would just help free up that movement a little bit in that area. We could certainly do that as part of our frontage improvements and roadworks. Again, the traffic impact assessment didn't note that there was any real impact from this particular project on the overall network, just because it's a busy road as it is. But again, getting people out of their cars and onto bikes and walking and taking the bus certainly reduces the impact of cars in the neighborhood. Again, we'll be providing replacement trees in accordance with the urban forest bylaw. Unfortunately, it's hard to build a 6-story building with a 2-story parkade and save trees on the site. So we'll be planting vigorously what we can on site with our landscape plan, and any trees that don't comply with urban forestry in that regard, we'll certainly be providing cash in lieu so that Colwood staff can plant those elsewhere in the community where they would thrive. We had 2 meetings with our neighbors. They had various concerns, as you can imagine. This is a big change to the neighborhood, and they were very gracious and came out. I think it snowed the first night. We had our meetings at the Children's Hall down at the corner of, it's at Kelly Road and Sooke Road, and it was a great little facility to host this event. So they were concerned about new vehicles, which we've been able to address, hopefully with splitting the right and left turns. Certainly regards about overflow parking on Linlark. Everyone thinks that residents are going to have 2 and 3 cars each, which is not the case because our parking studies that arrived at the new parking ratios in the Colwood bylaw have proven otherwise. However, we aren't asking for any variances. There may be the odd time where people are parking down the road, and certainly bylaw could deal with that if it became an issue. Safety of pedestrians on the street. Certainly we're near the end of the road, so we shouldn't be impacting the rest of Linlark. It should still be quite safe for the residents that live there. Again, request to limit the height to 4 stories. We can certainly look at an option to step the building down if you'd like to see that. And again, loss of privacy and trees. On that north side of the building that face the short end, there's no windows on that side. It's blank, so there would be no people looking over that end. And then on the east side of the building, again, it's set back away from those neighbors. That would give them a bit of privacy there. And the balconies would be sort of opaque glass instead of clear pickets, again, providing a bit more privacy. Concerned about dust, dirt, and noise during construction. Certainly, if I don't believe there's any blasting on the site, again, we're on gravel, but our contractors, we've developed, having done several other projects in and around the West Shore, we've been able to work with our neighbors and do what we call a good neighbor policy, where we meet with the neighbors. They have a contact number they can call. So if it's dusty, if there's noisy, if there's mud on the road, we get the call before staff does. And ideally, we like to head that stuff off of the pass and make sure that none of that happens, but it does. All of the construction parking would be on site, not in the neighborhood. And again, we would just keep everybody, make sure they all have contact information. So believe me, we get phone calls, but we usually deal with it again before staff has to. We'll make sure that we have all the services installed in accordance with Colwood bylaws. We have concerns about noise from the amenity area, which could be regulated by strata bylaws. There was comment about the need for commercial in the area, but certainly we have the commercial nodes at Hatley and at Allendale, as well as Belmont Market. Concerned about shading of the residents to the north. Currently, there's trees in that location. And some people, they're just not opposed to development. They just feel that maybe it's a little bit much for the neighborhood at this time. Again, our good neighbor policy, we're advising when construction set to start, trade parking on site, enforce noise bylaws and hours of work, controlling dust and mud, and have contact numbers for questions and comments. And then financial contribution, this is a little list of all the road development cost charges, sewer fees, amenity fees, and affordable housing fees. Apparently there's a fire hall fee, and I don't know what that number is, but we'd be happy to contribute, as well as our cash and live for trees, for over $1 million in contributions to Colin. So again, in quick summary, 6-story, 70-unit condominium, including 3-bedroom suites on a frequent transit route, bike and pedestrian friendly, bike storage and EV chargers available. We've done our preliminary neighborhood consultation, and we will likely do another one before public hearing. Extensive landscaping includes trees, plantings, and amenities for the residents. Tree replacement at 2-to-1 or cash in lieu. We would extend the gravity sewer 130 meters down Lindlark. There's little or no traffic impact, except we would do the traffic lane delineations, full frontage improvements on both Sooke and Lindlark, as well as future road dedication and our good neighbor policy through construction. Thank you so much for listening to all of that. We're happy to answer your questions. And certainly we do have our consultants online and in the room if you have specific questions for them.
Great. Thank you, Rachel. I appreciate the presentation. Questions? Anyone committee you'd like to kick it off?
Hi, one of my original or first questions rather is you mentioned that you were able to fit 3 lanes, so a left turn, a right turn, plus the ingress on Lennard. Do you believe it is that wide, and will also in future allow for sidewalks on both sides?
Yes, through the chair. It's a 20-meter right of way there, which is quite large compared to most local road and cul-de-sac rights of ways of today. So even though the pavement that you see there today is quite narrow, there's a lot of working room in that right of way. And our engineers would do the design to Colwood's approval.
Thank you. And the other question I had is the report from Colwood cites that there's a non-compliance around a 0-meter setback, and yet your presentation sort of indicates otherwise. And I was trying to maybe reconcile that difference and understand it.
I believe we have our setbacks are compliant except for the front setback because we're dedicating the road on Sooke Road, the dedication there.
Yeah, so I'm just looking at table 1 of the reports, and that would be page 3, the bottom row saying minimum setback for an underground or under building parking structure from any lot line being 3 meters, and the report says that you're at 0.
Thank you again for the chair. This is compared to the new TGA zone that we have not had a chance to work with yet. Typically, underground parkades do go to 0 lot line because you just need that room in order to get all those parking spaces to fit. So that's kind of standard procedure. However, if we were to work with the zone, we may request the variances that because it's an awkward shaped lot to be able to get the foundation in and fit. Quite often you work with encroachment agreements too with your neighbors, you know, in order to build buildings in an urban setting like this.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Wait, sorry, just a procedural thing. If you have a question, if you trigger your button, you'll see it goes green or flashes green, and then I'll just take them in order of how they go. So if anyone's going to ask anything, just
Can you hear me okay? Thanks again for the presentation. I have a couple questions, and one sort of builds off of James's question regarding the side street there and relating to visitor parking. I believe I noticed there was 3 stalls dedicated as visitor parking? Did I read that correctly? And if so, are those in the basement?
All the visitor stalls that are required by bylaw would be in the underground parkade, but we could also looking at doing parking scallops along Lindlark to provide additional parking on the road right away if needed.
Yeah, that was part of why I was wondering whether you guys considered any sort of on-street parking along the side street that would help for deliveries, taxi drop-offs, anything along that lines.
Yes, through the chair, I believe there's enough right away to work with that.
I guess the other question I had regarding, you made a comment about the stormwater management in terms of the site being fairly porous in terms of the water running through and infiltrating into the ground. However, with the unified basement to a 0 lot line, how would you anticipate that? Is there going to be some surface runoff to the sides, or is there some consideration to that?
I believe that we haven't got into that level of detailed design yet, so forgive me again through the chair. But in other projects that we've done, we've been able to actually do underground tanks to sort of manage the flow rates.
Okay.
So, the same amount of rainwater falls, but of course it's going to run off and it would find its way into underground tanks or through the storm drainage system if it had capacity. But again, Co is lucky and that has a lot of gravel and permeable material.
All right, thank you.
This being a condominium, will the condominium bylaws allow for a certain amount of rental, all rental? What, or will you be registering in the original bylaws, the condominium bylaws?
A lot of stratas that I work with have general rental bylaws that won't allow you to rent for more than or less than a month to avoid Airbnb and disturbances from that. Or sometimes people have bought an entire floor and uses that as rental. You can have mixed use. Regardless of the use, this building will be strata titled. So if it were to be a rental, it could be converted to a condo at some time. But once the developer sets up the strata bylaws, the strata has the right to change those. Usually at the first general meeting. So even if, the developer were to set up a bylaw that allowed rentals, the strata could change that if they wished.
Were the public consultation that you had, was there any feedback directly from the immediate neighbors to the north?
We had some conversations with them because there are some shared trees on that boundary that we may have to remove. And yeah, they were in the meeting and we've got a good relationship with them at this time.
Okay. Being to the north, are they continually shaded or they still receive some natural light?
I
Direct.
believe that they're currently quite shaded. The existing trees are quite tall. They're big firs, so they're shaded by that now. Our buildings actually step back further away from the property line than the trees are now, which may provide some sunlight access to them. They didn't actually appear to have any concerns about that when we spoke with them.
Thank you.
Any further questions from the committee at this point? Yep, everyone there. James?
Yeah, I wasn't entirely sure if this is a question for the developer or back to the city, but in terms of like the level of compliance that the proposal originally had before the new zone was in place, as well as like what the motivations are behind the 4,000 square meter lot size for 6-story, as well as the 60-meter lot width requirement of the new zone, just to make sure I understand like to what the intent and the purpose of those sort of pieces that put this proposal under not meeting the current policy.
Yeah, if I may, thanks, Colin, Desiree to respond to that.
Thank you. So the intent of the minimum lot size and lot width requirements of the new TGA1 zone is just to ensure that there's not going to be an overcrowding or too much density proposed on a lot. So this is a requirement that came as a recommendation from the architect that helped us peer review the transit growth area 1 zone, and it was their recommendation that a minimum lot size of 4,000 square meters be established. And it's just to ensure that that there's more parameters, just to ensure that there's not going to be over densification of a lot. And
So our minimum lot frontage is also, so Sooke Road is an arterial road. What we're trying to accomplish through development along Sooke Road is to consolidate driveways and eliminate private driveways to lots all along that corridor. The big vision and intent for Sooke Road is an HOV lane that facilitates that transit growth intent, and one day could deliver that rapid service to the city of Colwood along its arterial corridor. So the whole vision for us is trying to ask for lots that are of the scale and size where a 6-story building feels proportional to the land base, and where we can reduce and eliminate driveway access along as development emerges. So every time that we see development that would benefit from consolidation of an adjacent lot where we could turn 2 driveways into one, we would like to pursue that wholesomely to try and facilitate that rapid transit vision into the future to deliver the best potential for this arterial road to facilitate rapid movement of a transit as a transit corridor. So it is both to create a scale of a 6-story building that feels at the right scale in terms of the land base, and the lot frontage is looking for lot consolidation to reduce the amount of individual driveways.
Thank you. I have one more. It's not related to that. It's related to a form and character question that you asked about. Sorry. Do you want to respond to that?
No, you're still, we'll come back to you.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Right.
I'm sorry, who's your question for?
But regarding the form and character, sorry. When I took a look, I saw the renderings in terms of the overall look and the aesthetic of the building. One thing that I found I struggled to try to identify was where the front entry was or the arrival of it. I don't know if the developer or the architects will consider some sort of way of enhancing the entry, whether through landscape or changing materials or something, just so it's more predominant from either Sooke Road or from the park.
Yeah, through the chair, we'd absolutely welcome that opportunity to take that under advisement and make those changes.
Yeah, sorry, I know that my original question was actually several parts, and I just wanted to tie back to the very first one that I asked was, before the new zone came into place, how far through the process was your proposal? And in the same fashion that we have a report in front of us today for the new zone, is there a report for before the zone that is available to us for evaluation? I'm just trying to make heads or tails of like how you know, there's certain things that the city has concerns about based on the new zone, and you did mention that your proposal was in place before the new zone, and so there is something to consider. That I just want to understand how far away from compliance you were before.
Again, through the chair, certainly, as you can imagine, you know, we had applied for this last year and a great deal of time and effort had gone into it, and certainly got a lot of comments from staff that we believe that we had, you know, mostly been able to comply with. But because of, you know, it's a 6-story building, and it's we're trying to meet the floor space ratio and also the idea to provide as much density as we can along this corridor, and trying to be as sensitive as we can to the neighborhood. So we certainly see just generally where we had some areas of the OCP that we were hoping to be able to work with. Certainly, we'd be willing to try stepping the building back a little bit on the north face in order to reduce that impact. We've got that large amenity area on the east side that again reduces the impact to our neighbors to the east. And so that's sort of, you know, again, coming before this brand new committee, we were kind of uncertain what we should expect and how much work we should do beforehand, because you may have other things you would like to see. So, you know, great ideas about enhancing the entrance as well. So what we were hoping to be able to do is take those ideas back and be able to work with them and produce something, maybe with some changes that you would feel would bring us more into compliance in those areas. Certainly, we do meet the intent of the OCP in a lot of ways. There's just a couple of areas where we could work on that if you would let us. Thank you.
Great, thank you, James. Any other questions from anyone on the committee at all? No. I would, sorry, Rachel, if you don't mind, a couple of questions of my own. I know for me, it's, you know, it's relevant, certainly the proposal in its initial format and what was there under the rules of the time. But then the reality is as well that council has advanced the TGA 1 zone, and that's sort of the governance where we're working within now. Now there is some latitude built into that, you know, to explore each you know, project based on its own merits. So I do have some concerns, and I think I've been upfront with you about this in the past, about the height of the building and the rather abrupt nature of going from, you know, a single family cul-de-sac, quiet kind of neighborhood to, you know, an abrupt 6-story building, you know, that fills a large portion of the lot. I have the advantage, I suppose, you know, of having knocked on every door, and Lynn Larkin's spoken with all residents except one. I had to go back twice, but you know, the consensus sort of from the folks on the west side was very much in opposition to the height and density of the building. As you round the bend, it kind of relaxed a little bit. Traffic was the primary concern, as you probably know. You know, right around the corner, we're surprisingly a few folks weren't that concerned at all. So, you know, there is a wide variety of viewpoints there. But I would say the majority certainly had concerns with the abrupt nature, you know, stepping up to 6 stories. And that harkens back to the TGA 1 zoning and why I believe city staff, and I hesitate to put words in their mouth, but you know, why it's been introduced. It is to provide that graduated step from what in Colwood is very common, single family residential, to where we now do want to see this type of density. So the project in isolation, you know, I use that term sometimes. I like the 3 bedrooms in particular, I think are an attractive missing component in multifamily housing. But you know, you indicated there is perhaps some ability to revisit the form, and I wanted to just mention a project from your group, or the group you represent, Land Vision, the Delta Green multifamily project, for example. It's a 4-story building. You know, when I look at the built form of that and I look at this lot, I think, well, you know, that seems like something, you know, I personally can get behind it. I'm putting on my council hat, but I just wonder, you know, what's the middle ground? What's, you know, when we talk about these hypotheticals now for us to advance a recommendation to council, I mean, what do we think is feasible here? Is I can just be honest and tell you, I think the 6-story in its current built form would be a challenge to move forward.
So this is Mr. Karan Nagar. He's one of the principals at Land Vision and an experienced builder.
Thank you, Rachel. Yeah, I think, I feel like that's a little too loud. Yeah, there's absolutely some common ground that we can definitely work with. Unfortunately, the size of this particular site makes it a little bit difficult to be feasible for a 4-story, in consideration to the cost of the parkade, in consideration to building 4 stories and then, you know, marketing those condos. So that's something that we had digested. We had run some scenarios quite a few times, and in terms of feasibility itself, in terms of, you know, from a developer and a GC standpoint, it was very difficult to make the numbers work, to, you know, go 1 level or 2 levels parkade and then go 4 up. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it. Oh, I see your colleague is stepping forward.
And I'll just comment, so the Delta Green proposal that we did previously in Delta, so that particular property actually was zoned for kind of a 3-story townhouse. And because of the lack of housing for seniors, staff actually gave us a height variance where they gave us more height, parking variance, and essentially we catered to a demographic that needed housing. So we worked with the city to provide essentially higher density, higher floor ratio, and then parking variances to get the 4-story where everything around it was 3-story townhouses. So that was kind of how the 4-story Delta Green came about.
Appreciate that. Yeah, and again, I'm looking more at the built form than you know, the sort of origins of it, but just
Yeah.
the, you know, the building itself, I see is a bit more
Definitely,
aligned
if
with
the
the-
design concept, we can take back to the drawing board and contribute those design forming characters to this. So that's definitely open for interpretation in terms of us revising that.
Thank you, appreciate it. And another question, just briefly for staff, either Desiree or Desmond, just in terms of the recommendation put forward that that we recommend to council that this be revised. Do you have an alternate timeline? I know we saw a timeline if we advance it to council in the current proposal. What does the alternate timeline look like if this is sent back for revision?
Thank you, Councillor Ward. So the timeline would depend on how long the applicant needs to revise it. I guess It's kind of just depends on their timelines. I'd imagine if it takes up to a month, then we'd schedule for introduction back to, I guess it would go to council for consideration with those revisions taken into consideration. So I'm not able to comment on exact timelines. It's not dependent on staff. It'd be how long the applicant needs to revise their submission.
Great, thank you, Desiree. My last question, Mr. Earl, perhaps for you, just in terms of procedure. If my understanding is correct, chair does not vote unless a tie, or does chair vote with the committee?
Thank you, Chair Ward. All members of the committee, including the chair, vote.
Thank you for clearing that up. Okay, any further questions from the committee to either the applicant or to city staff? None at this time. Okay, then just to be clear, what we're voting on then will be the staff recommendation that the Planning and Land Use Committee recommend to council that the proposal be revised so that it complies with the regulatory conditions of the proposed TGA1 zone. So a vote in the affirmative would be to send it back for revision, just to be clear, so we know what we're voting for. So I would then ask for a vote. All those in favor of the recommendation, please raise your hand. We have 5 in favor. Nope, sorry, 1, 2, 4 in favor. Yeah, my math is bad. That was me. I saw your hand down.
Chair
Yeah.
Ward? Chair Ward?
Yes, please.
Procedurally, I'm not 100% confident of whether or not there was a motion on the floor.
Correct. Yes, sorry. Let's take a step back here. Do I have a mover for the recommendation? So moved. We will now do that vote again. All those in favor of the recommendation, please raise your hand. So we have a vote of 4-1. Okay, moving on to 4.3, I would call upon Desiree Gibbons.
Thank you. The next item in your agenda is another application for a rezoning application on Sooke Road. This is for 2054 through 76 Sooke Road. And just for context, the history of the file is provided here, similar to the previous application. Staff received an application in September 2022. It went out for review by other city staff and external agencies. The applicant conducted their community engagement and have received feedback and revised their proposal based off of the feedback provided. And now they're here tonight for consideration by the Planning and Land Use Committee. For context, the property is located across from Royal Roads University. It's a proposed lot consolidation of the 5 properties shown here. The applicant is here tonight and will speak more to their proposal. However, they are proposing to develop 2 6-story residential apartment buildings that will consist of a total of 150 units. And again, similarly to the previous presentation, I'll just quickly go over the OCP policies for transit growth areas. The transit growth area supports low-rise, ground-oriented buildings up to 4 stories and 6 stories in limited situations. It also supports a floor area ratio of up to 2.5. Staff have no concerns that the built form policies have been adhered to for this proposal. The applicant is proposing to step back the building or have the first 4 stories and then step it back up for the upper 2 stories, so that satisfies the condition in the transit growth area that 6 stories is only permitted in limited situations where enhanced urban design features are able to mitigate the upper 2 additional stories. And then in terms of the transition in scale, as mentioned, 6-story buildings or any development that happens along transit growth areas needs to sensitively integrate into the neighborhood. So that means single family 1 to 2 story buildings or go up to 4 stories, up to 5, and then 6. And with this application, the applicant is satisfying the transition in scale, again, by stepping in the upper 2 stories of the building where it's adjacent to existing residential single-family homes. Public realm policies, proposals in the transit growth area should be demonstrating improved public realm for transit users. The applicant is proposing to provide frontage improvements along Sooke Road, so staff are satisfied that this policy has been met. And similar to the previous application, this proposal is not in a greenfield. It's not a greenfield site, and it's not in an environmentally sensitive area, so there's limited applicability of natural assets policies. However, similar to the previous application, the development will require a removal of all existing protected trees. However, they are proposing to retain a few at the back. In terms of the evaluation of this proposal against the Transit Growth Area 1 zone, this proposal meets the minimum parameters to qualify for a 6-story building. They are proposing to develop on a lot that has 5,000, just over 5,000 square meters in area, as well as a lot frontage of 135 meters. And they're proposing to include increased setbacks for the 4th story and above, wherever it's adjacent to existing single-family residential. Here's just a kind of brief summary of the communication with the public to date. The applicant held an open house in January, and they have installed a notice sign on the property, and they're here before you for consideration. Next steps will be going to council for a decision, and then public notice and public input / amending bylaw readings. The staff recommendation is provided in your agenda package. I haven't included any additional options in the report, but committee does have a couple other options that they may wish to consider, including that staff be directed to provide additional information before council makes a decision, or that the application be denied. The applicant is here tonight and will be presenting to you, and we are available if you have any questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Desiree. Is that good? Okay. Good evening, committee. My name is Cameron Salisbury. I'm Director of Development with West Urban Developments. I'm here tonight to present our application for rezoning at 2054 to 2076 Sooke Road, and answer any of the questions you may have in relation to our application tonight. So here's an overview of what I'm going to speak to in the presentation. So a little bit about who West Urban Developments is first. So West Urban Developments is a Vancouver Island-based development company of over about 200 employees, and we're based out of Campbell River with offices in Courtenay and Nanaimo and Victoria. We primarily focus on purpose-built rental, multi-residential buildings, and we focus on the entire spectrum of development from the planning stages through to property management. We have projects across the island from Campbell River to Sooke and Tofino, the Fraser Valley, the interior BC, Calgary, Winnipeg, and Upwell. Staff went over where the site is, but the original application for the zoning amendment was to rezone the 5 subject parcels shown on this map to allow for a multi-residential market rental, as I mentioned, of approximately 150 units with 2 levels of underground parking. The subject properties are about 1.3 acres in size and located on the north side of Sooke Road between Hatley Memorial Garden Cemetery and Peace Park, directly across from Royal Roads University. So the proposed rezoning amendment is consistent with the official community plan, and development lands are located in the neighborhood designation with the overlay of the designation of the transit growth area, which has been highlighted. The site sits between Colwood Corners designation and the neighborhood center designation located in the corner of Sooke Road and Kelly Road intersection. The site is near 2 primary active transportation routes and a number of proposed routes. The official community plan also provides guidance through a variety of other policies that the proposed development aligns with. Those listed on the screen are some of the various policies the proposal complies with, and the main ones it relates to are providing market rental units as identified in the housing needs assessment,
creating a critical mass of people to support public transportation, providing housing within walking distance of retail centers, and focusing density along the Sooke Road primary transit corridor. In terms of the original zoning amendment application, it was a comprehensive development zone, as the previous applicant was, to allow for the development of 2 market rental apartment buildings totaling approximately 150 units. The draft zone that was originally submitted proposed 6 stories with stepping down at the back with 60% lot coverage and 2.5 floor area ratio. At this time, the plan is to provide a mix of 1 and 2 bedroom rental units throughout the buildings. I mentioned that the buildings are stepped down in the back to create that better interface with a lower density development to the north. And this complies with the OCP development permit guidelines as well. So as has been discussed all night, the transit growth area 1 zone was presented and discussed. Staff have recommended that our proposal use the new TGA 1 zone to provide consistency with the future zoning in the corridor. And West Urban is amenable to using the new zone, provided the zoning amendment application is not delayed due to the introduction of the zone at this time, given our application was submitted 8 months ago in September. But we are amenable to use the new zone because we feel we can adopt our proposal to fit within it. And those aspects that we would pursue variances on if we weren't able to match it to the new TGA 1 zone. So in terms of external circulation responses throughout the process, the application was reviewed by these external referees, and all noted responses have been addressed through our proposal, or is our proposal is consistent with them. I just wanted to note that BC Transit expressed support for a reduction in parking stalls due to the proposed development being located on the primary transit network. West Urban is not seeking any reduction in parking per the off-street parking bylaw. We're proposing to meet it with whatever development comes forward at development permit process. And as part of the application process, staff requested a variety of further information, including traffic capacity assessment, preliminary servicing report, and a tree protection plan. All this information was submitted and supports the proposed development, and it's in your package tonight. West Urban also posted the notice sign and held a public consultation session on January 25th at Colwood Elementary School, and that's detailed a little bit on an upcoming slide. As staff has highlighted, they're recommending that a series of conditions be required after 3rd reading of the zoning amendment, but before adoption. West Urban is generally in agreement with the majority of the conditions, including the rezoning to the TGA 1 zone, consolidating lots, providing road dedication in alignment with the Sooke Road corridor study, and registering a Section 219 covenant development agreement, agreeing that prior to building permit issuance, offsite works are completed or servicing agreement is entered into with Colwood. And that a housing covenant is registered in a Section 219 that secures rental tenure for a minimum of 20 years. So we're in favor of all of those. So in alignment with what the staff report says, West Urban would like to express that it is our preference to not enter into a Section 219 covenant to attach parking stalls to units and prohibit charging monetary fees for those parking stalls. In our experience as a developer, we have found that the flexibility to allocate parking in our developments has been beneficial to ensuring that parking is provided to residents who need it. Not all of our residents of our developments require parking stalls, and they welcome the reduction in costs with not having to pay for parking, either extra or built into the rent. So this is especially the case in urban environments that have other modes of transport close by, like frequent transit, share cars, and extensive pathway systems. So we are proposing, like I mentioned, to meet all of the parking requirements of the new offsite parking bylaw. And we would ask committee and council to consider this perspective when making recommendations and decisions on our application moving forward. And as mentioned, I'm not going to get into a lot of design of the site because it's very conceptual at this point, but we feel we can meet the TGA 1 zone. Here's the existing site plan for the application with the 2 buildings located on the front part of the lot. And this is showing the expected road dedication and front yard setbacks and how it would help widen Sooke Road to the 30-meter cross section that is being called for in the Sooke Road corridor study. And as I mentioned, we held a public meeting on January 25th, and we had 5 attendees come out, and 3 were in support of the application and 2 of the attendees were not in support. And the reasons they cited for not being in support were privacy, increased traffic, and parking concerns. And at the bottom of this slide, you can see a cross-section sort of the massing of the buildings that we've undertaken to this point. That shows different locations where the building steps down at the back adjacent to the single-family residential to sort of mitigate that impact of a 6-story building on the adjacent neighbors to the north. And with that, I'm here to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. I'd open up to the committee for questions.
This is a question, I think, for the city, just in terms of your experience. I've heard from developers that their experience is that the marketplace is looking for flexibility in terms of the parking, and just wanted to hear the city's point of view on that.
I mean, probably best practice and completely understanding and sympathizing with the developer. We understand that to facilitate mode shift, pricing parking is one of those progressive moves that you can do to shift use. Perhaps one of the challenging aspects is that we have a recent similar rental building that very much like this proposal benefits from close proximity to the Galloping Goose and an even closer proximity to the transit exchange in a very well-served area in terms of transit, where we have seen the impact of residential development from those rentals. Once a price was assigned to those stalls, then a lot of people opted out for not making the monthly payment and relocating elsewhere on the street or on commercial parking. So these would be Colwood Corners, where we do have similar conditions in terms of proximity to the Galloping Goose, amenities that would be supportive of a mode shift that we haven't yet seen. That is not to say in the case of this developer, it is clear that the intent is to market the units with the price of the parking known in advance of a lease agreement. My understanding is in Colwood Corners, that shift to the pricing of parking happened after the fact. So maybe people were not making an informed decision when they enter into that lease or agreement. It is very much a philosophical debate as to whether should we price, stay out of the way and allow a property owner that has run this business and has experience managing these buildings do what they do best and see how it unfolds. There's a few caveats or conditions in this particular neighborhood. Sooke Road being an arterial road, there is no on-street parking on an arterial road. So the only available, there's basically no ability for any spillover effect where people could park anywhere else but the cul-de-sac immediately at the rear. There is not a ton of proximity to others on-street available parking within proximity. So we're putting it forward for consideration to the committee and then for further debate and conversation with council and seeking direction.
Great, thank you. Did that answer your question? Or?
It did.
Okay, great. I will go to James.
Yeah, I think it's fair to talk amongst ourselves. I was so focused on just questions previously. When it comes to the parking aspect, historically as a renter, the nicety of just knowing where you're going to park at night is definitely worth the money. And nominally, it's usually about $30 a month on top of the existing rent. And then when coupled with the ways that we can motivate the average person to not exercise car dependency, I don't think that overflow onto the streets is necessarily a concern unless the parking requirements aren't satisfied and available, because I have also run into that where there's only a handful of spots for a plethora of units, and that's where the issues truly do arise, and some people opt out, some people opt in, and I think it's a good system for managing parking. So I definitely side on that. Moving on to like my actual questions though, I do have a couple of things. Since this is a purpose-built rental, one of the portions of the report, section 11, table 3, page 9, in the attainable housing policy of Colwood's, where it cites that it prefers 1 unit per 10 residential dwellings to be provided for affordable housing. But for your proposal, that is not going to be the case. We'll be providing cash in kind. I think that your proposal is a good candidate for providing affordable and attainable housing, versus like, enforcing on the condominium proposal that we were just reviewing. So I wanted to hear your thoughts on why that is not something you want to endeavor.
Great question. Thank you. Through the chair. So in our feasibility analysis, we look at the properties and come up with what makes sense from that perspective. And actually, one of the programs we that we often use is the MLI Select program through CMHC. And that program actually offers the opportunity for building efficiency as well as a percentage of affordable housing based on sort of a formula they have. I have some information here. It's a pretty detailed program, but we look to use those type of models to actually bring that into our buildings where we can, if it makes sense. And this would be a candidate for that. But looking at it a little further is something we can definitely take back. At this point, I believe our approach would be market rental at this point, because it is market rental proposal, and that's what we know the best. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
And as a further question, one of the covenants that you're willing to sign is the 20-year rental. Mostly due to my lack of understanding, is the 20 a standard, or is that something they'd be willing to increase? Because I don't see a reason why a purpose-built rental would transition away from it after a 20-year period, but I'm just trying to understand why there is that 20-year versus like call it 100 or something.
Great question. Thank you. Through the chair, it depends on the municipality. I don't know if it's a standard for Colwood necessarily. I think it is a 20-year rental covenant, but municipalities have different 10-year or timelines in terms of the covenant. Some go 10, some go 20. Victoria goes longer, I believe, in some cases, but it's on a site-by-site basis, I think, unless there's a policy in place. And I don't know if
Perhaps Yasmin, you could fill in.
So I would say up until probably a year ago, we were only asking for a 10-year covenant, and then we increased it to a 20-year commitment for that rental component. And the 20-year timeframe came from a different proposal about a year ago that said like we should ask for an additional 10 more years. But you are correct that it would be hard to transition a rental building after 20 years of a specific treatment or model of rental back into condominium.
Thank you.
Great, thanks, James. Great questions. Any other questions from the committee at all? Anybody? I see no blinking lights. Just to sort of getting a little granular maybe with the applicant, just if you don't mind, on the north side of the development where you've got the surface parking and the waste and recycling, I did speak to one neighbor around in the cul-de-sac who was concerned about that placement, and I just wondered how flexible that is in the design. I hate to be crass, but the neighbors to the east are fairly quiet, and I just thought there are other locations potentially that might address that. Now, it's relatively minor, like I say, it was just person's offhand comment, but in terms of design, I know where we can, if we can minimize impact on existing residential. So just curious about your thoughts on that.
Great question. So in response to that, it's definitely up for discussion in terms of where that's located. We would like to locate it on the east side. The issue with that at this point is the ramp to the parkade is on that side, so we'd have to reconfigure it. We tried to pick a location that was minimal impact if possible. But just because the site is so tight, because we're losing that frontage for the dedication as well. You know, we have surface and under building parking on the top and then 2 stories of underground as well. So we're trying to maximize the parking as much as we can. And this made the most sense for an accessibility perspective for the servicing of those recycling and garbage bins as well, because it's straight in from the Sooke Road access. So we can explore it if it's the committee and council's sort of prerogative, but at this point, that's why it's located where it is.
Sure, appreciate that. And then just with regard to James' question around the 20-year covenant, I'm just interested now in the hypothetical. You know, if council were to seek a longer duration, are you amenable to that?
I can't speak to that. We could look at it. In my experience, 20 is the maximum that we would entertain.
Sure. And again, just hypothetical. I haven't come across it before, but I appreciated the question. So thank you.
Yeah,
Appreciate it. Okay, if there's no further questions from the committee, we are looking at the recommendation. I believe I don't need to read the whole thing. We can see it. It's fairly lengthy. Am I correct, Mr. Earl? We don't need a rereading of the recommendation?
Thank you, Chair Ward. You do not, you heard from the applicant tonight with respect to one of the components of the recommendation in the parking section, their desire to not explore the section 219 assigning parking to the units. And so I just draw that to your attention because it's contained within the body of the recommendation.
Thank you. At this point, I don't know if anyone wants to move this. My personal inclination would be to move it as it stands, but I will leave it to the committee to see if there's a mover on the recommendation as it stands or with an amendment. Any? Kathleen?
I am a bit confused in terms of whether we have dealt with the issue of whether or not the parking is bundled. Is that part of the recommendation? Is it part of the motion or not?
Mr. Earl, maybe you can clarify. As it stands now, it is part of the recommendation, correct?
Thank you, Chair Ward. Within the recommendation, there are several components. There's a section called offsite works with an A, B, and C. In section B of the offsite works, it deals with parking. And in this section, it suggests that the parking be coupled and cannot be unbundled. You heard from the applicant the desire to unbundle. And so if a committee was desirous to move forward a recommendation, you could do so by striking section B and reading it absent that section, or you could move it forward as it reads.
My personal view is that we should strike it and that the developer should be able to choose what the market bears. In particular, I'm looking at the proposed TGA1 zoning, and it's pretty clear that what's proposed is we accommodate people who choose to have lifestyles which are less car dependent. So in furtherance of, you know, the broader purpose of this zone, I would advocate that we allow that to go unbundled.
Thank you. Appreciate that. I would be inclined to agree, if I may. Just you know, I believe James, you spoke to that from experience, and I think you know, we heard from Yasmin, and I concur that the current issues Colwood is facing with the Ani Group development at Colwood Corners really does stem from, you know, a buyer beware scenario where things changed after the fact. In this case, the applicant is indicating that, you know, the conditions would be clear up front, you know, and we are on a major transit route in a transit corridor, and we are looking to do some mode shift and move towards a bit of a greener world. So I'm inclined to agree with you on striking that. Mr. Earl, does that require a vote on the striking of section B?
Thank you, Chair Ward. There's not a motion on the floor. So should a member of committee decide to make a motion, they could make the motion as written, absent section B.
Thank you. Well, in that case, just to expedite things, I will make that motion. I will move that we accept council's recommendation on 4.3, notably striking the offsite works section B related to parking. So I will call for a vote. Those in favor, raise your hand. Unanimous. Thank you. That moves us all the way to number 5, adjournment. Do I have a mover to adjourn the Land Use and Planning Committee? Somebody has to agree. Okay, I'll take Kathleen as moving that. All those in favor? Thank you. Meeting is adjourned.